I wake up on a shuttle I never boarded, and my first thought is not fear, it is irritation. The seat is too small, the recycled air smells like antiseptic and burned circuitry, and there is a document resting on my lap, stamped in 3 languages, 2 of which I cannot read. The third is English. It says Predator Summit, restricted access, authorized attendees only. My name is on it. I am Commander Priya Vasanth, UN Diplomatic Corps, Trade Attaché, negotiator of 7 recycled plastics agreements, and 1 very complicated fish licensing dispute that took 4 years and nearly broke me. I have never, in my entire career, been invited to anything labeled restricted. I am, by every metric the Galactic Consortium uses to classify species, prey. I eat the last half of my emergency nutrition bar and try to figure out what happened. It takes me about 20 minutes, piecing it together from the documents in the seat pocket and a very nervous automated message from my supervisor that came through just before the shuttle jumped. There are 2 Commander Vasanths in the consortium's diplomatic registry, me and Commander Adeze Vasanth, a decorated military officer with actual crisis training and a record that includes 3 successful first contact negotiations with hostile species. The invitation was meant for her. The shuttle pickup was dispatched to my apartment block because someone filed both of our addresses under the same identification cluster 8 years ago, and no one ever fixed it. By the time anyone realized the error, we were past the jump point. The summit is 3 days. I have 1 nutrition bar wrapper, a standard diplomatic badge, a cold I have been ignoring for a week, and a legal notepad I use for grocery lists. I decide this is manageable, because the alternative is crying in a shuttle that smells like burned circuitry, and I have never been good at crying. I land at the summit station, and I walk through the doors, and I stop. The room is large and deliberately neutral, designed by someone who understood that apex predators in enclosed spaces have a tendency to make decisions everyone regrets. The ceiling is high. The lighting is diffuse. There are 12 delegations seated around a curved table so long I cannot see the far end clearly. I scan the room the way my grandmother taught me to scan a room, which is to say, I look for the exits first, then the people, then I decide whether to stay. I stay, because my nameplate is at an empty seat 3rd from the left, and sitting down seems safer than standing in a doorway. I will describe what I see, because it matters. The Vorkai delegation takes up most of the left side of the table. 9 feet tall, slate gray, with optical structures that never quite focus on one point, but somehow track everything at once. They have a posture that communicates violence, the way a thundercloud communicates rain. Not directly, just as a property of existing. Across from them, the Hrethka, 6-limbed and chitinous, iridescent in a way that hurts to look at directly. 4 other species I can partially identify from briefing documents I read 2 years ago, and mostly forgot. And at the far end of the table, the one everyone else seems to be pretending not to look at, is the Galvorn. I know about the Galvorn the way most humans know about things that exist very far away, and have never personally threatened us. They are large. They have distributed cognition, which means their nervous system is not centralized the way ours is, which means stunning one does essentially nothing. They have eaten diplomats before, not out of hunger, but as a philosophical statement about the meeting not going well. Every species in this room is afraid of the Galvorn. The Galvorn seems to know this, and seems to find it satisfying. I sit down. I find a pen in my jacket pocket. I open my notepad. The lead Vorkai stands. This is, I will learn later from a cultural briefing I absolutely should have received before landing, a ritual dominance display. It triggers a neurological flight response in most prey caste beings. The instinct is immediate and nearly impossible to override. Most species in this room have never seen it fail. I look up from my notepad and meet the Vorkai's eyes, because my grandmother raised me to make eye contact when someone stands up in a meeting. I am not making a challenge. I am making eye contact. These are different things in human culture, and the same thing in Vorkai culture, and I do not know this yet. Nothing happens for 11 seconds. The Vorkai sits back down. The room is very quiet. I write the date at the top of my notepad and ask the aide standing near the wall if there is coffee anywhere on this station. There is not. I write that down too, as a grievance for later. The first day of the summit is supposed to be territorial declarations. which is the diplomatic equivalent of everyone in the room, announcing how much space they intend to take up before the actual conversation begins. I listen, I take notes. I do not understand approximately 40% of what is being said, because the translation is good but not perfect, and some concepts do not cross the language gap cleanly. What I do understand is that every delegation is angry about something. Most of the anger is about resources none of them actually need urgently, and everyone is waiting for someone else to back down first. On the afternoon of the first day, the Rethka flood the room with fear pheromones. I know this happens because I see 3 other delegations physically recoil, and the automated ventilation system kicks on at a setting I have never encountered before, which I later learn is the emergency dispersal level reserved for chemical threat events. What I experience personally is a sharp smell, like citrus and ammonia, and then a fairly spectacular sneeze, because I have a head cold and my sinuses are entirely uninterested in the geopolitical situation. 12 apex predator species flinch. The sound in the room afterward is nothing, not quiet, nothing. The absence of everything that was happening, replaced by 12 delegations staring at me with expressions I cannot entirely read, but which share a common quality of very deep uncertainty. I wipe my nose. I reach into my jacket for a packet of tissues. I hold one out toward the nearest SK representative because it is a reflex, the same reflex I have when anyone near me sneezes, which is to offer a tissue. The Rethka stares at the tissue. I put it on the table between us and leave it there. No one takes it, but no one floods the room with anything else either. That night, I cannot sleep. I sit in my assigned quarters, which are small and smell like nothing in particular, which I find unsettling, and I read the full summit agenda from beginning to end. I have been ignoring it because I have been managing moment to moment, but sitting still forces me to look at the whole picture, and the picture is clarifying. 12 species, 7 active territorial disputes, 14 contested resource zones, most of which are mineral-rich but environmentally hostile to all 12 of the species fighting over them. No one actually lives in most of these zones. No one could. They are fighting over territory that none of them can use directly, but which all of them have decided is necessary to control, for reasons that have less to do with resources, and more to do with not being seen to give ground. I have sat in 17 meetings exactly like this. The species were human, and the contested resources were fishing rights and recycled plastics processing contracts, but the structure is identical. Everyone is waiting for someone else to be reasonable first, because being reasonable first looks like weakness, and looking like weakness in a room full of apex predators is something none of them can afford. I understand this problem. I know how to solve this problem. The solution is the same regardless of whether the people in the room have claws. I start writing. On the morning of the second day, I ask for the floor. The room assumes I am about to make some kind of precast appeal for my own safety, which I understand in retrospect, because that is the only reason a precast being would request time at a predator summit. What I do instead is stand up, flip my notepad to a page I have covered in a framework I sketched out between 2 and 4 in the morning, and begin explaining a tiered resource-sharing compact. The idea is simple, even if the room takes a while to follow it. Each species cedes nominal administrative claim over the resource zones they cannot practically use, in exchange for guaranteed access rights and processing partnerships with species who can operate there. No one gives up face. No one retreats. Everyone gains actual material benefit instead of symbolic territorial wins that cost them in military positioning to maintain. The mutual economic incentive is the mechanism. The face-saving structure is the packaging. I know it is working when the Rethka delegation stops producing any kind of chemical signal at all. Silence from them, I have learned in 36 hours, means they are thinking hard. 7 delegations sign before the afternoon session ends. The Galvorn does not sign, but the Galvorn also does not leave, which I have been told is unusual behavior. It watches me. I am aware of being watched by it the same way I am aware of being watched by something very large, standing very still in my peripheral vision. I do not look directly at it for most of the afternoon, because I am busy, and also because there is a part of my brain that would like to preserve the illusion that if I do not look at it, it is not quite as real. At some point between the second and third day, the Galvorn moves to the corridor outside my quarters and stays there. Security cannot move it. I wake at 3 in the morning to the sound of the security detail having a very strained conversation with each other in the hallway, and I open the door, and the Galvorn is sitting outside my door the way a very large, very complicated, and very alien creature sits when it has decided somewhere is where it intends to be. We look at each other for a long moment. I reach into my jacket and find a half-crushed packet of trail mix I forgot I had. I open it. I hold a handful out. Every instinct I have inherited from 4 billion years of evolutionary history is saying something quite specific about this moment, and I am ignoring all of it, because my knees have stopped working, and moving in any direction requires knees. The Galvorn eats from my hand. It is surprisingly gentle. I name it Gerald, because it needs a name, and because it has an energy that is specifically Gerald-shaped, patient and enormous, and slightly judgmental. Gerald spends the rest of the night outside my door. When I come out in the morning, Gerald follows me to the meeting room. Security tries to intervene twice. Gerald sits down next to my chair during the third day of negotiations, and no one in the room says a single word about it, because no one in that room is willing to be the one to address the situation. The third day finishes the compact. 7 full trade agreements, signed and filed. 3 observation accords with the delegations that needed more time. 2 species still undecided, but undecided is not hostile, and not hostile is a foundation. The signing ceremony takes place in the main hall with the high ceiling and the diffuse lighting, and Gerald attends. And at one point during the ceremony, I absent-mindedly rest my hand on whatever passes for Gerald's shoulder while reviewing Clause 7, and I only realize I have done this when I notice that every other delegation in the room has gone completely still and is watching me with an expression I have come to recognize as the expression apex predators make when they encounter something they do not have a category for. Gerald makes a sound like very deep, very slow thunder. I take this as contentment, because the alternative interpretation does not help anyone. The shuttle home smells better than the shuttle out. Gerald is in cargo, which required an amount of paperwork I genuinely did not expect to exist for the situation of a Galvorn voluntarily boarding a diplomatic vessel and refusing to disembark. My supervisor has called 17 times. I have listened to 2 of the messages and decided the others can wait until I am on solid ground and have had actual coffee. The Galactic Consortium releases the summit results 3 days after we land. 7 trade compacts, a ceasefire framework for predator-caste territorial disputes, and a note, circulated internally and not officially published, that places humans in a new category on the consortium's threat assessment index. The category is called Unclassified Behavioral Anomaly, which I understand is their way of saying they are not sure what we are or where we fit, because we do not respond to danger signals correctly, and we have a documented tendency to domesticate things that are supposed to be terrifying. I file my incident report on a Tuesday morning. It is 11 pages. I attach the signed trade compacts, the observation accords, and a photograph of Gerald sitting in the cargo bay, wearing a small bow tie, that one of the flight crew fashioned out of safety tape, because they thought it was funny, and because Gerald tolerated it, which says something about Gerald. At the bottom of the report, below my signature, there is a second mark. Gerald pressed its equivalent of a hand to the page when I was signing. I left it there because it felt right, and because Gerald was present for most of the events described, and witness signatures have legal standing in 11 of the 14 consortium jurisdictions. My supervisor reads the report in full silence, then reads it again, then puts it down on the desk and looks at me with an expression I have seen before, on the faces of people who have just realized that the situation they thought they understood is something else entirely. The bow tie, he says finally. Gerald chose to wear it, I say. I feel that distinction matters. He closes the folder. He looks out the window for a moment at the city below, at the ordinary morning happening on the other side of the glass, and then he looks back at me. Next summit is in 40 years, he says. I know, I say. I already told them to have snacks. Gerald prefers the ones with the crinkly wrapper.